So today's podcast is all about understanding why story always wins and data fails. Before that, let us understand the architecture of the neural science or the narrative way of persuasion when it comes to human brain. Okay. So the scientific, if we don't understand the scientific part, it will be very difficult for us to understand why story always win at the initial level and why data gets you results at the last level and not the opposite. Most corporates I have worked with, consulting I have worked with in B2B, B2C, mostly B2B companies, they generally don't avoid storytelling. They use fact, figure, benefits, and that's the reason most of the communication of B2B always fails. So this idea is to make sure that you don't do this mistake and you do storytelling in the initial level to put across your point to the users or the customers. Data, when you talk about why data fails, the reason is that whenever we human being hear anything about ROI, imagine a percentage of delivery you're giving certain person. Imagine it's a 37%, whatever is what happens is that then human brain start comparing and understanding the baseline. Then what is the industry? Is the industry giving 25 and you're giving 37? Is the math? Then it will also start about what is the sample size based on what figure and fact you're saying it is 27% or 37%. Next is there any hidden cost? Is there any hidden criteria or whatever? So people will start, that's how brain will shield when it comes to data. We think data helps to persuade. No, absolutely not. It's always the story. Okay, so these are the questions comes to users' mind when they see certain data in your website, in your content, in your brochure, when it comes to sales pitch. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, if you see the graph I just mentioned below, is that what happens when someone see a data and vis-a-vis someone see a storyline. Okay, so when it comes to data, people they will have to go through hard thinking, understand the data. Next is they have to be very carefully checking whatever you're saying it is right, wrong, based on his perception, based on his research, based on his past experience, so on and so forth. Third is it's a hard logic to check whether everything you're saying is getting synced with the user's brain. And last time what happens is that the last bucket is generally it gets rejected. So that's the rule of how brain function when you throw some data fact in the initial level. Vis-a-vis, when you tell him a story or her a story about your organization, your belief system, your purpose, and based on the purpose, how those things are graduated and how things can help them, in a storytelling format. What happens? It's a very easy thinking, very fluid. The flow is very simple. The thumb rule is they know, okay, this is what's going to happen. There's certain storytelling. So what happens? He's off guard. He's not using any checks and guard to verify your story. And what happens? And he's experiencing your whatever you're telling him, right? This makes him comfortable. That's the reason brain will not reject your storyline compared to data. So 90%, 95% or 95% of the communication most of the time you should be talking with a easy flowing feeling route. It's easy to talk about, easy to understand. It should not be data driven. So if you see the graph I just mentioned here, so these are the techniques you should use whenever you're using, how you can use it. If you follow these rules and ask ChatGPT or Claude to tell you, if this is the facts and figure, initially how do I bring a storytelling method? Tell me a storytelling method process. So in my next AI slides, I want to, maybe in the next video, I will have to tell you how you convert this B2B or B2C business into storytelling. It's a different video altogether, but I will do that so that it helps you. Now, how brain works, okay? How brain works and judgment or judging vis-a-vis experiments, experiencing. So what happens, the main way of thinking, how a brain thinks is that when you put data, it's very, to be clear, it has to be fact-based. That's how brain will start thinking. But when it comes to a story, a narrative, a pathway, process, the emotional is more important, based on feeling, and simple rules are very simple, to understand. what your mind is doing, or what your mind does when they see these two things, story vis-a-vis a fact. When it comes to fact, your mind will start checking the fact, looking for missing information, and so on and so forth. Whereas when they see a story, they will start to visualize a mental picture. They will get to start feeling about what is happening in the story. They become a part of the story. That's the beauty of it, right? And they're not checking with any sort of guards, right? So they're off guard. So that's the concept. The third one is usual state of mind. What happens when they see a fact is doubting and little cautious. When it comes to story, there is no doubt. They get lost in the story. They are accepting it. That's the huge shift. And the fourth one is how you react to ideas, right? So when you see a data, you will start thinking into reasoning. Is it wrong? Why it is so? And so on and so forth. You will start reacting into ideas. But when it comes to story, what happens? You're easily accepting and you're trying to fit within the story. So that's the reason judgment versus experiencing is a huge factor when it comes to business storytelling or communication storytelling. The way information is presented changes the way your brain reacts. Okay, so facts make you more arguable, and stories makes you more you want to more join within it. So that's the huge difference when you say story versus data or features. How story lower the guard. There are three parts. If you see the graph below mentioned is, one is the awareness stage of the surrounding, one is the mental picture of the surrounding, and one is the emotional part of the surrounding. So what happens whenever you're talking a very immersive story, what happens is that the stories are not just fun. Stories are used to use your mental energy, making it very hard to doubt. You're accepting it, and we get persuaded because critical thinking temporarily get blocked. So you're not judging, you're not using any critical thinking, you're accepting it. So one is the awareness stage where you're focusing on the story. Second is your picture where he's getting immersive through the images and he's trying to see he's a part of the story. And the third is emotional thing. He's connecting whatever you're saying with the characters, with the colors, with the story, line, and so on and so forth. So that's the huge. This is how your brain reacts when you tell a story versus a data. Now the key factor for getting lost in the story, if you see this, what sometimes you get lost in the story. Unexpected setting, if you do that. Ads, stories work better than the ads, number one. People will start expecting the certain fact, but stories will surprise them. They will make them they're a little less defensive. They will enjoy it, right? They are not using any guard to reflect any reaction. Second is real sources, which is regular people versus companies. Stories coming from real people make them much more easy to believe it, right? Compared to, they want real heroes. That's how story should be put across. And it will look more honest, more real compared to companies, which looks like an advertorials or ads. So that's the reason if you see my earlier videos where I mentioned why too many UCG videos will not work, because it looks like an advertisement. It doesn't look like a story, right? And the third one, the last one, is the audience. Now, if you're telling story to one, there is no distraction. He get immersed into the story. Whereas when you're talking about, you're giving your audience to, you're talking to everybody. So which means target audience. There are 5 personas you should select before you get into storytelling method. You're not telling everybody. You should know whom I am talking, and if that person can relate, then it is one-to-one. So this is how the storytelling method generally works, and so that the people don't get lost in the story, they stay with you. This graph which I mentioned here, how the neuroscience alignment happen when you're telling a story. As per the Princeton University, it says that a human brain will start mirroring what the presenter is saying and what the listener is hearing. They try to see what you are trying to do that. This gives him or her the advantage of hearing you the entire communication in a much more immersive way. So this happens when you are storytelling, but if the moment you start throwing data, this type of neurological science alignment between two people or one to many don't happen. Okay. Our brain rewards us when we go through such type of storytelling method, right? First is a cortisol level, so we are more focused about how it, this is how it pays, the cortisol level, start getting in, and make sure that your brain focus on what is more important. That's how the cortisol level will start focusing on the immersive way of story within the story. Second is oxytocin connection, which is the reduces the doubt. It will build trust between people and the story, and whatever makes it's very open. So that's the reason it's gradually go up. Connection becomes between the listener and the presenter gets in a better shape. And the last dopamine release happen, which is the brain gets a reverse that this is what I experienced, this is what I loved it, or this is what the message came out at the long little surprise effect. That's how the dopamine happens. So if this three things happens within your storytelling, then communication is far better. Whatever you're trying to tell to the user or to your customer or your partners or your vendors, it goes through very, very easily. That's how brain works. Okay, this is a commercial part of it when it comes to B2B, B2B narrative. Most of the time there are 10, 15, 12 or sometimes more than 10 to 15 people, other stakeholders who takes a call. Generally a B2B takes around 8 to 9 months, a bigger ticket size, to get converted. And there are so many stakeholders in your entire process before you will be able to do the final deal or the sale, right? So enterprise get paralyzed by too much of information overloaded, and not an information is, they will not know which one to choose and which one to leave. Too much of bombarding, and every fact and pitches increases decision making more difficulty. So every time you're pitching first pitch, second pitch, third pitch, so the difficulty level of understanding becomes very hard. So this is the reason when you are only talking about features or you're talking about data, it will not pass through. Vis-a-vis if you do a storytelling method, it's far more better off telling B2B sales or communications can happen in a far more effective way. To win, a brand must be emotionally embedded between the logical evolution where it begins, right? So the shortlisting becomes easy. So these brands, there are many brands who came for the product, a demo, but this brand is very, very good. They understand us. So that narrative becomes easy for user when you use a storytelling method. The Stanford University says that the story always stick, right? Which is like 5% people will remember the fact if there are 9 or 10 based presentations, happening, and 10 to 12 presentations happening, for 1% or 2% or 3% take a call, whereas 63% people will remember the story detail. That's the difference between storytelling and data. Okay. So the memory boost within, we are like 22 times more likely to remember any part of the story. That's the study from the Stanford. So the recall value is far more better. So after too many people came and presented, so they will only remember the best guy who give you a storyteller method than the person who only talk about the features. So that's the biggest dent you can make on a decision-making cycle to the leaders and CXOs, because they're too much bombarded with data, information, presentation, but storytelling will stand out. So another method is called 46-54 formula, which is a place where you can use brand and emotion is like 46%, and 54% is the activation and the logic, which means story will open the door and fact will close the cell. Okay, it's not that data fails. Data should come at the last and not at the first level. When I say story open the door, is like helps people to remember you or whatever, even if they're not ready to buy. Okay, they will remember you. And the last part is, even if facts close the cell, what do I mean by that is that offer the proof, needs to come convince them to buy it, right? And who are ready to buy now, only give them. Otherwise, don't give your offer to everybody random from stage one. Hold it. Have some patience till you go to the last stage. So the best approach is stories are not a replacement of fact. Please don't misunderstand me when I say when my thumbline says that story fails. Data fails and story sales is not the thing I mean by that. I said story is not a replacement, right? You will definitely need logic, but logic come at the final stage and not at the first stage. If you use the first stage, you will lose human brain are designed to first reject you because if they are too much bombarded with data. As simple as that. So let me give you the final formula of integrated communication system. First, you should talk about the story, which will get your attention. Second, get into the context part, which is the empathy part. Third is the evidence part, which is the validation part. Fourth is the decision, which is an action. So introduce a person facing a problem is the first, and objective like make the audience connect with the and so that they can drop their guard and they can listen to you. That's the first one when you say the story part. Second is your objective in the contextual part is to build empathy and to create trust, and nothing more than that. Evidence part is support feeling and the fact more than anything else. So here you can use data, here you can use result, here you can use proof, right? And the last one is the decision making. The objective is to turn interest into action. So if they're ready to buy, and then say this is something, we have an offer for you XYZ, and that's how you can sell. If you use this principle in your, which is also sometimes we use in UX called the golden circle, golden rule. So same thing happen. If you read, if you see Simon Sinek's golden rule, you will find it one of the Simon Sinek TED Talks. I keep on saying, if you read that TED Talks, TED Talks, where Simon Sinek spoke about the golden rule. If you use that, you will understand why the human brain, how Apple say communication vis-a-vis why Samsung and other Nokia or any other company who almost make the same similar type of phone or gadgets, but their pitch or their storytelling is very different, right? It is sometimes a story comes and feature comes there last, and some people use feature fast and sometimes story get last. So, but human brain follow this. Please use it. It will help you. The last word is that facts can lead into arguments. As simple as that. Whatever you say, human brain is designed to question and have argument and do a judgment. Even if they're not saying, but they're actually, it's going through their brain, and that's what happens. But story always give them an experience, everybody, right? And we love stories, So if you want to change behavior, if you want to change your business cycle, start with a story, end with a fact. As simple. I hope it helps, and I hope you will be able to change your communication. Use these techniques on your ChatGPT and Claude so that you can craft your communication in this manner, starting from a awareness stage to the last sales. And let me know in the comment section if you agree or you don't agree. Whatever is working for you, let me know. Thank you so much.